Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We've got a lot to talk about. There's so much that is going on. It is very, very difficult to choose topics. But you know what? Here we go today. We're going to be rolling through a lot of the relevant topics throughout the week, so just stay tuned. Let's talk about Mahmoud Khalil. He's a young Palestinian who is an Algerian national, graduate student at Columbia University, who is facing deportation. His wife is 8 months pregnant and counting. She's closer to delivery than she is to anything else. And so they were having a lovely evening when the authorities burst in. They did not identify themselves, but they burst into their home. They even threatened to arrest her, an American citizen. And they took him to places unknown. Indeed, some people have called it an abduction. They said it felt like a kidnapping. That's the headline in Common Dreams because that's what it was. That is what the family of Mahmoud Khalil said after they released the video. It was frightening, absolutely frightening. Can you imagine a woman who is about to give birth being under that kind of stress? Can you imagine someone bursting into your home and not identifying themselves, not telling you where they're taking your husband? In this heightened and toxic atmosphere, you don't know what that is. You don't know if these are authorities, or you don't know if these are hostile, otherwise hostile actors who want to do undue harm to the person they're abducting, the person they're seizing. So let's dig into that because it turns out that President Trump signed an executive order to really stop anti Semitism. Is that what's going to happen here? Or will he provoke even more? I want to hear from you today. So please, everybody, lock in, and let me know what your thoughts are. Please, please, please like and share the show, like and share the show, like and share the show. We've got Attorney Terry O'Neill, civil rights lawyer and the past national president of the National Organization of Women. Always so glad to have her. And we've got the adjunct professor of law at Roosevelt University, specializing in immigration, my soror, Anastasi Sanat, attorney Anastasi Sanat, and the cranky librarian. I love it. I love it. The brilliant, really, she is a volunteer. She's an activist in our community. We're so excited about all that she is doing. Jewish Voice for Peace is the largest pro Palestinian rights Jewish organization in the United States of America today. If you're trying to take a train in Penn Station or in New York, watch out because they are there blocking everything. I love it. I love it. I love it. And one of the leaders of those marches, we're going to have my dear Benjamin on in the next hour. But you know, a lot of people are very, very upset about this, and they ought to be, because the implications for this young man's arrest, and they didn't tell him that he was being arrested. No, they didn't tell him anything. They just removed him from his home. The implications are grave. Remember, even though there's a national holiday celebrating Dr. King's birthday, celebrating his life, he was a dissident who was harassed by our government at the highest levels of our government. And indeed, they've been implicated in his murder. Paul Robeson was a dissident. W.E.B. Du Bois was a dissident. We can just keep on going down the line. Malcolm X was a dissident. There are a lot of dissidents. And we need to be careful how we treat them in real time. They're honored typically after they have died. But how do we handle people with whom we disagree, or people whose narratives fly in the face of the narrative of the status quo? How do we treat them? Is this what we're going to do? Are we going to imprison them and disappear them? He is living in New York, but he has found himself in Louisiana, a state that is notorious, and you know it well, Terry O'Neill, for having some of the worst prisons in the United States. So he's being held in an ICE detention center, at least that is according to reports, but we don't know. what his condition is. We don't know what's happening to him there. There's so much that we don't know. Is this what it's come to? Disappearing people in the United States? Well, we have something called Home and Square. Leslie Williams, an attorney, so now you know that in Chicago, it is a police site that has been inspired by the black sites from the CIA, where many black men were taken and they were disappeared. Yeah, in the United States of America. So please don't say this is not who we are, because it is exactly who we are. But let's talk about it. Let me just go clockwise. Let me start with you, Attorney Leslie Williams from Jewish Voice for Peace. What do you, and sending my love to Miss Rose Liuzzo. She is the daughter of Viola Liuzzo, one of our great. That's right, one of our martyrs in the civil rights movement. The Detroit mother who left her wife and her husband and children, and went to Selma because she was so outraged by the injustices inflicted upon Black people, and she lost her life there. She was murdered there. She was part of the sacrifice that got us our voting rights. And we thank God for her today. And they are family. And I'm sending them so much love today. Leslie, what did you make of this this abduction? And I was speaking with Jonah Karsh on Reverend Jackson's Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson show earlier. And he called it an abduction, and that he said he's been disappeared. I said, oh, wow. I know your language and your selection of words is quite deliberate, Terry. And Leslie, I said, but this is accurate.
Yes.
He has been disappeared.
It is
wow.
accurate.
Well, talk to me.
So I'm not going to talk too much about the immigration and legal aspects of two people on the program who have a lot more expertise than I do. But I think it's important to remember that, first of all, this is not new. I mean, this particular case has gotten a lot of attention, but for many, many years now, Palestinian activists have been harassed, have been subject to what you might call extrajudicial punishment, to doxing, to loss of jobs and loss of livelihood. So there was a case of the Holy Land Five here in the Chicago area, who also were deported, but also imprisoned before they were deported for supposedly supporting terrorism. And I think one of the issues is who gets to define what is terrorism and what is supporting terrorism. So there was the designated foreign terrorist organization list, which Congress can decide on, and it can decide if a foreign group is engaged in terrorist activity. And if somebody is supposedly endorsing terrorist activity and they are not a citizen, that makes them vulnerable to deportation. But why is it primarily people of color, people who support Palestine, people who support freedom movements, decolonizing movements that are subjected to this law? So argue, and I argue about laws make sense, but the question is, why is it only people who get prosecuted or threatened with deportation? We're not seeing, for example, Russian or Putin supporters in the United States being dragged out of their homes and subjected to deportation. It is often people of color, it is often African Americans, Latinos, or Middle East Arab residents that are being subjected. And I think also when we talk about terrorism and what is a terrorist organization, we should remember that the African National Congress was for many years designated as a terrorist organization. And it seems to be that it is whatever organization the current leadership sees as a threat. And Trump has made it quite clear that he is determined that Palestinians and those advocating for Palestinians are a threat. But I think we should also remember that the same organizations that are calling for the deportation of members of Students for Justice in Palestine and people like Mahmoud Khalil are also calling for people who support critical race theory to be removed from their jobs. And they're also supporting the ending of teaching ethnic studies, teaching Latino studies, teaching African American studies in schools and universities. So I think we need to look at these connections between all of these very right-wing, often blatantly white supremacist organizations that are anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, but also anti-Black and anti-Latino. and ask why it is that these laws tend to be applied to those groups of people and not other groups of people.
Attorney Anastasia not. According to reports, these authorities who burst into the Khalil family home did not identify themselves. That is stunning. And he is a permanent resident who is married with a green card, who's a graduate student at Columbia University, who is married to an American citizen. What are his rights? Do you have rights? First of all, what is a permanent resident?
So a lawful permanent resident is someone who has the ability to remain in the United States pending that they follow all the rules, right? They're not a threat to national security is the situation that we're in here, in which the United States government has indicated that he is a threat to national security. And I believe from what I really don't know Mahmoud Khalil. I don't know him personally. I don't know his facts personally, but I do understand from the news reports that he entered as a student visa holder, and the Department of State found that information and tried to revoke that initially, saying that you're not allowed to stay in the United States because you're a student visa holder. However, through his attorneys, it was discovered that he did actually have lawful permanent residency status. Now, that status leads you to naturalization, which is citizenship, and it puts him on a pathway to citizenship. However, the reason why apparently they're at LaSalle Detention Center, and I say it's Gina, but they say it's not Gina, it's Jenna, Louisiana, which I actually used to do some work there. I was there for about a month in 2018. But that detention center does have a lot of different people. So the section of law that applies to this particular case is Section 237. And the specific section that he's been charged with in order to be removed from the United States is a national security section. And from what I understand, the reason why he has been charged with this section is not just because he supported or promoted anti-Palestinian hate. From my understanding, he was supporting and promoting Hamas. And I believe Leslie Williams already kind of mentioned it. There's a federal terrorist organization list, and Hamas has been on that list since October 8th, 1997. Obviously, long before this guy was born. But in doing so, it becomes the government's burden, right, to show by clear and convincing evidence, which is it's higher than a preponderance of evidence, and it's lower than reasonable doubt for those that are trying to figure out what I mean. But basically, the government has to show by clear and convincing evidence that he actually is deportable under that section of law. And if they're unable to show that, then he'll be able to maintain his green card and he'll be able to continue on his pathway to citizenship. Alternatively, if they do prove it from whatever evidence that they might have, he then has an option to seek relief from removal. And it could be considered cancellation of removal for a lawful permanent resident. It could be, trying to adjust his status, which may be a little bit difficult because I've told my students, right, as an adjunct professor at Roosevelt University, I've told my students that Section 212 is when someone's knocking at the door trying to get in. And Section 237 is someone who is already in, but is now being asked to leave. And that's where he is. But if they find him deportable, then he'll be in the other section, which is 212. Will they even let him in? And the truth is, if you've been found deportable for being a threat to national security, it's going to be really hard for you to get in to the United States when you're knocking at the door, even though he's married to a United States citizen, he has a child on the way. All of these things will impact his ability to remain in the United States, if in fact the government can prove that he's removable under those grounds.
Attorney Terry. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that immigration law hasn't really changed since like 1952. A lot of people think that it changed, but it hasn't. Section 237 has been on the books all that time. The thing is, when they use it, they use it. And it's currently one of those untested areas of law. And so it will be interesting to see if he can be found by clear and convincing evidence that he's actually removable.
Okay, I would like to ask a question because I think this is really important, and it gets back again to this question of what we mean by supporting terrorism. So in 2010, there was a Supreme Court case, Holder versus Humanitarian Law, and it said that simply advocating for violence, expressing support for a terrorist organization for its goals, or even actual membership in a foreign terrorist organization without more does not qualify as providing material support to terrorism. And also, I believe it's Congress that is supposed to determine whether or not someone is supporting terrorism and is deportable. And it feels as though this situation, not only is it selective prosecution, but it also feels like it isn't really following due process. And I would love to hear more from both attorneys about what they think about those aspects of it.
Well, first you, Anastasia.
Yeah, I actually had a case in which I found I had charged so this person had come from Liberia. This person was an interpreter, French, English interpreter, and he had become hired by, at the time, a war criminal, a known war criminal. And my argument when I worked as an immigration prosecutor was to establish that even that level of support, I'm a hired interpreter, is considered material support of a terrorist organization. The judge agreed with me. It went up to the Board of Immigration Appeals. The BIA agreed with me. It went up to the Seventh Circuit. Seventh Circuit agreed with me that he did, even though he was just an interpreter, that communication that he did provided material support. So when we're thinking about language with respect to material support, it's very broad. I'm sure Terry will go into more detail about that. But at the end of the day, those phrases are extremely broad. So I'm not sure, again, I don't know Mahmoud Khalil, but I have no idea what they have in order to prove that he has provided any kind of material support to Hamas or anti-Semitic behavior, or that he is a national security threat. But it can be as simple as just being an interpreter. And so that case that you brought up from 2010 obviously doesn't trump the case that I was talking about, because my case came long after that. So when we're thinking about those terms, you have to really put it in an extremely broad understanding. So it could be clear and convincing based on broad understanding of immigration law.
Attorney Terry O'Neill, going back, as we're looking at immigration law, and even as we're looking at, well, just what did you make, before I even get down the street on those questions, what did you make of this man being at home with his wife, and these persons burst into his home? They don't identify themselves and they carry him away. She was asking, when you see the video, Leslie and Attorney Sinat, she said, where are you taking him? Who are you? Mm-hmm. What do you do? They would not even give her the respect of telling her who they were, where they were taking her husband. I mean, Terry, this is horrifying to me. Okay, you're muted. Okay, Terry, you're muted. So just
there we go. Sorry.
There you go.
So I'm not an immigration lawyer. I really don't know immigration law. So let me lay that out there first of all. But let me just throw this out. When and if the law permits kidnapping and disappearing of a permanent resident of this country, now what was publicly said is that he is engaging in anti-Semitism, and that is what makes him, and because he's engaging in anti-Semitism, that aligns him with Hamas, and because he is engaging in anti-Semitism, therefore aligned with Hamas, therefore he's a terrorist, therefore we can do this. If the law allows government officials to do that, then I think it's a direct quote from Charles Dickens, then the law is an ass.
Mhm.
And to take it seriously. I mean, if that's not justice, that is not protecting Americans from terrorists. That's not even close to protecting Americans from terrorists. It's very clear that the intention of the administration in doing this highly publicized kidnapping and disappearing is intended to terrorize others, to frighten other people into not complaining about Israel's genocide. And let's be very clear, the United Nations, there's been a big debate going on ever since October 7th. There's this huge debate is what is Israel's army doing? What is the military doing? Does it count as genocide? Is it ethnic? What is it? And the United Nations, after a lot of debate, has said yes, it's certain specific things in Gaza that are going on at the hands of the American military do amount to genocide. So when you complain about Israel's genocide, if American law then allows the American administration to kidnap you and disappear you to Jena, Louisiana, right? Which is a notorious. I lived in Louisiana for 20 years. So I love the place. I lived in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. I know my people down there. There's a lot of it that is not at all pretty. And if the law allows this, then we are dealing with a deeply unjust and a deeply immoral law that needs to change.
And I would say to give the State Department their due, what he was actually accused of is that the organization he was involved with Columbia had made statements supporting the October 7th attack in Israel, and that was considered endorsing a terrorist attack. But I think, again, looking at why certain people who make statements that can be described as endorsing terrorism are being targeted and others are not. For many Palestinians, the October 7th attack, the Al-Aqsa flood, was a military attack, a military campaign. And for them, this is a liberation struggle. This is a decolonization struggle. This is their United Nations guaranteed right to resist. But the United States has determined that is terrorism, even though, as Terry was suggesting, that is not necessarily the opinion of many other governments or the United Nations. And you can make the argument that the Al-Aqsa flood operation was part of a liberation struggle. And again, as I had mentioned before, other anti-colonial liberation struggles have been described as terrorism by the United States, like the African National Congress's struggles against apartheid South Africa. But again, I would want to stress that there are what seems to us to be due process concerns. The fact that they didn't just find out that he was a green card holder when they came to his house and they claimed that they were taking him because he had overstayed his visa. He actually said, look, I'm a green card holder. Here's my green card. And then they said, oh, well, we're revoking your green card too, which ICE does not have the ability or the authority to do. So it's not just a matter of removing aliens who are allegedly supporting terrorism, but how is this being done? Who is deciding that this should happen? And why does it not seem to be following the due process guidelines for either green card holders or anybody else?
So I would just push back a little bit on the due process allegation, because he is getting due process. When he was picked up by the ICE agents, they did identify themselves. Took a long time. They did eventually identify themselves. They told her that he was taking it to Federal Plaza, which was the detention area in New York. I don't know why he ended up in Jena, Louisiana, or Gina, as I like to call it. But, Department of Homeland Security just has the ability to relocate people throughout the United States in whatever detention facility they feel might best serve their interests. In this particular situation, I do understand that the United States citizen wife is kind of at a disadvantage because she can't get the community support nor probably funding, and if she's 8 months pregnant, like you said earlier, Zora, how would she be able to even get to Louisiana in order to support her husband? And Jena, Louisiana is is very, it's like in the woods. You know, when I used to go
Mhm.
to the detention facility, it took us about an hour because we had to, you know, get our hotel room in a different part of Louisiana. And then it took us about an hour just to get to the detention facility because there weren't hotels and various types of things in that area, in order for us to remain there and be exclusively able to go to work and do and perform our prosecution duties. But I do think that he is getting due process because he's aware of his charges. He's able to argue. And although I did see the video, I don't know if they burst into the house. That's kind of
Well,
dramatic terms, but
it showed
I
up
did
at
see
their
that they
door
did
before
put him
they
in handcuffs because I think he came to the door and went outside of his house.
But the question about due process, the DHS agents told him that the Trump administration had revoked his green card, which is something
Yeah,
that only an immigration judge can legally do. And
yeah.
so
So
when
the
you,
United States Department of State, Secretary of State isn't it Mr. Rubio?
yeah,
Right. So Rubio is part of the Trump administration and he's part of that cabinet. And what he did was he found the opportunity which the State Department does give for a student to come in and revoke his status. And then when he said about the green card, again, Rubio said, based on what my boss, Trump, said, you can't stay because we believe that you and your opinions and your activities are going against our foreign policy positions. And therefore, I'm going to revoke your ability to remain here in the United States. So that's something the Secretary of State has every right to do.
but there needs to be, I think there needs to be something more than just, I think that you are going against our foreign policy and that makes you a danger. So does that mean that anybody who says that they oppose the foreign policy aims of the United States is a threat and is subject to deportation? And it's also clear that this attack against Khalil was commissioned by Israel supporters both in the United States and outside of the United States, and that the intent of this is to silence Palestinian activism, that the intent of this is to terrify other Palestinian supporters, many of whom are not citizens in the United States, and to basically silence this movement. And to simply say that you can say, well, we feel that you're a danger, that you oppose our foreign policy, does not to me feel like due process, and does not to me feel as though it's really consistent with American law and with the Constitution.
So feeling one thing and being one thing is two different things. And so I understand your feeling. But the truth is, this law, which I already said is rarely used, came about during the Cold War era.
Exactly.
So they used to use this against people they thought were communist. 1952, I wasn't here in the United States. I wasn't even born, right? Terry and I are part of the same generation, right? We weren't here in the United States. We weren't born yet. But at the end of the day, these laws were created and obviously approved by Congress and approved by the president at the time. And the fact that they are so broad was because they wanted to use that in 1952. I mean, how many different, I mean, I'm sure you probably know, Miss Williams, how many different Black people were accused of being communists, right? They couldn't deport them because they were born and they had birthright citizenship. But how many had been accused of communism? And that was used in 1952. Fast forward, we're in 2025, right?
Well, but you know what? Let me jump in here because Black people who were active in the civil rights movement were accused of being communists.
Yes, that too.
But what did not happen? But we could not be deported.
Right, you can't be deported.
We could be imprisoned, but we are indigenous to the country, at least the 400 years of this Anglo project, and so we could not be put out. But so I think we have to really take apart, you know, that which is legal and that which is moral, that which will stand the test of time. Because what's very dangerous is for this to happen. You cannot criticize said group, said country. And what is unsettling to me is the blowback, because I'm beginning to see it when I read comments. And it was something that many of my Jewish friends have speculated about. They worry because they're saying, wait a minute, not in my name. This is not what I'm doing. And not to mention the fact that even beyond what's happening, even though we have to look at what's happening with Mr. Khalil, we have to look at an environment in which I come from the civil rights movement, Leslie, and Attorney Shanat and Attorney O'Neill, where I know people who didn't live. I saw people whose lives were made a living hell because of dissent. That happened in my own home. And that having been said, I think we've got to look at this, because if the police can just come to you, Department of Homeland Security, whoever they are, and remove you from your home, and then his wife has to, in her delicate condition, find out where is my husband, and then you find out he's not even in New York. They've taken him to another part of the country. She can't see him. I mean, this is like, wait a minute, you all. What is your point? I mean, because if you're trying to win hearts and minds, you're not doing that. But this, to me, is very, very dangerous, what they've done with him. That means no one is safe in their homes. Breonna Taylor, here we come. She wasn't safe in her home. I mean, we're not safe.
Well, and it's also, it's part of an effort to really target students. Trump has issued this executive order about anti-Semitism, but there have been earlier congressional attempts to essentially criminalize Students for Justice in Palestine and even criminalize JVP, and claim that we are supporters of Hamas because we are arguing for Palestinian liberation. But the American Civil Liberties Union has stated that college and universities should not bow to federal pressure to punish international students and to punish faculty for being involved in pro-Palestinian protests. And yet Trump is claiming that these protests should be considered illegal. So what is a more basic violation of our civil liberties and our right to protest than claiming that a campus movement is illegal, that campus protests are illegal because they are not consistent with U.S. foreign policy?
Well, and look, I understand many people, the Jewish community feeling beleaguered, because they have been. But I'm from a beleaguered community too. That having been said, I think it's quite telling that I can criticize the United States. Now I'm gonna pay a price for it. But you're going to send me, they're even talking, of sending Americans to prison.
Yeah. Well, and also, as always, it's important to maintain the distinction between Jewish people and people who support Israel and people who consider themselves Zionists.
The problem is, Leslie, people don't.
Yes, but we have to insist on that difference, because for one thing, many Zionists, Joe Biden very proudly considers himself a Zionist.
Absolutely.
Many powerful non-Jewish people consider themselves Zionists. And unfortunately, a lot of those same people, as I said, are allied with these other right-wing organizations that are very anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, and anti-Black, frankly. So yeah, there is enormous pressure from Zionists, both Jewish and non-Jewish Zionists, to support what Trump is doing. But that does not mean that this is what Jews as a group believe. That is why we see, as you mentioned earlier, Jewish Voice for Peace taking over train stations in support of Palestinians. A couple of days ago, Jewish Voice for Peace New York took over the Trump Tower in New York to detention of Mahmoud Khalil. So the question, I think, for all of us is, do we believe in American values of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and the ability, the right, the duty to criticize our government, or don't we? And if we for those who are very strong supporters of Israel, I think they have to ask themselves, is your support for Israel more important than these really obvious violations of civil liberties, which, as you were suggesting, could become more and more dangerous for everyone else? I mean, I always think of the famous Martin Niemöller statement during the whole about first they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak up because I was a trade unionist. I think now we could say, first they came for the Palestinians, and did we speak up? Then they came for the trans people. Did we speak up? Then they came for the undocumented. Did we speak up? And these issues are very closely aligned. And as I said, the people who are calling for the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil are also the people who are attacking critical race theory, are also the people who are attacking ethnic studies, are also the people calling for mass deportations of undocumented people.
Well,
very interesting that you mentioned that, Leslie, because the way that you characterized your statement just now was, do we as citizens not have the freedom of speech any longer? And the truth is we do. But we're not talking about a citizen. We're talking about someone who's in our country with our country's permission. So yeah. I do believe that the Constitution obviously still applies to him because due process has been given to him under the Fifth Amendment, and it's applied to all states through the 14th Amendment. However, this is the thing. When you are not a citizen of the United States, you really should be cautious because you don't know how our laws will impact you or affect you, right? And so Mahmoud Khalil, although he's a student activist and he was doing what he thought he had the ability to do, it will impact him completely different than, for example, as Santita Jackson has just mentioned. He's not a citizen, so he can be deported versus the citizens who were considered communists during the civil rights movement. They couldn't be deported. So you have to be cautious. And I hope that people who are listening to this truly understand, if you're not a citizen of the United States, there probably is some obscure law that we are not aware of that can be used against you. And those procedures really only require that you are given notice of what we're going to use and that you give an opportunity to be heard. And of course, if you want, you can get a lawyer. And in this situation, he's had all of those things. But as a president of the Haitian American Lawyers Association of Illinois, as Santita Jackson has mentioned, I believe that's why immigration reform is necessary. I do believe that 1952 is so long ago, and our mentality and our way of doing business, not only with each other, but with the world, has changed significantly. I mean, it wasn't until 1974 that women were allowed to have their own bank accounts in the United States. So immigration reform is totally necessary. Is this an obscure, unused, untested? Sure. But we have to change it as citizens in order to help those who are non-citizens, right? If you're here as an alien in the United States, an alien is used as the actual legal definition of those who are foreign nationals in the United States. If you are here and then you ultimately get accused of violating some law, then you become an illegal alien, right? And then what do? How do you defend yourself? Well, if citizens are not going to their congressmen, if they're not going to their senators, and they're not asking for reform of the immigration law, then they're stuck with this 1952 obscure and untested law, and it will be used against them.
But let me tell you, though, I think that to me, the bigger issue is, look, while that is important, we're talking about dissent here. Let's not dance around this, because the ultimate issue, because a lot of people come into the United States and do a lot of things that are illegal or otherwise wrong, and they're allowed to stay. But this young man who is standing up for beleaguered people, they're trying to throw him out. It's as simple as that to me.
Well, but also, I think, again, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is part of a pattern on the part of the Trump administration that is actually affecting citizens as well. So we are seeing many, many academics throughout the country who, because of standing up for Palestinian rights, have lost their jobs. Recently, a tenured professor, a Jewish tenured professor,
Mhm.
was removed from her job at a university
Mhm.
for supporting Palestinian rights. So, although, yes, I understand your point, Attorney Sanat, that a green card holder doesn't have the same rights as a citizen, yet they do have some rights. And there has been disagreement in legal decisions about exactly what the rights of green card holders have to express dissent. But this is part of a pattern of suppressing dissent that is affecting citizens as well. When we see things like anti-BDS laws, anti-boycott, divestment, and sanction laws that have been used to silence citizens who have expressed support for the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, that is legal action that is being taken against citizens. So I don't think that we can dismiss what is happening to Khalil as simply being something that is happening to green card holders, because it is a part of this pattern of suppression that is affecting citizens and that could continue to affect citizens.
Yeah, but you see the impact is different on citizens, right? You're suppressed.
Impact, but
you might go to jail, but the impact is different. Here we're talking about Mahmoud Khalil and other green card holders that have an ability to be deported.
Right, but the reason
away from their family, away from their children.
But
this
the
is
reason
a serious
for
impact.
what happened to Khalil is exactly the same as the reason that 1952 law was used against people who were allegedly communists, who were involved in the civil rights movement, other movements. It was to shut that movement down.
And that Paul Robeson was pushed out of the country as a citizen.
Yeah.
Du Bois was pushed out of the country as a citizen. Wait a minute. These were freedom fighters. I'm trying to get to that point. Because I understand immigrants, their rights, permanent resident, and he does have rights, and he should have human rights. That's what we need to have.
Yeah, there are human rights in there, but they're less rights than what we're talking about under law.
You know what? Then say that to Paul Robeson.
Okay.
Yeah, then say that
to him.
No. Well, he's gone now.
I was about to say, didn't he die?
A long time ago. But he was a giant. He was a giant in our history.
And W.E. Du Bois, didn't he die in Ghana for the same reason?
No, he was pushed because he was pushed out of the country. Absolutely. He died on the eve of the March on Washington. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying over and over and over again, we have done this. Marcus Garvey was pushed out. I mean, we don't push out imperialists. We push out freedom fighters. That's what we do.
I mean, the Trump administration is using all of these obscure laws for a reason.
I'm saying not just the Trump administration, all of these administrations, when they see someone who is willing to, if you will, fight the power, they will push a citizen out the country.
If they could, yes.
No.
They can. If there's no one stopping them, of course they can, whether or not it's legal. And let's be clear, the president of the United States is a convicted election fraudster. Mm-hmm. Right. And just recently, a federal judge ordered some airplanes to be turned around because the deportation of some alleged gang members, which if they are
Venezuelan gang members,
those the judge ordered the planes to be turned around and bring them back. This was a federal judge ordering it, and they did not.
Well, that's because recently, the Trump administration was using some obscure law.
It was completely illegal. The failure to turn the planes around was completely illegal. The Trump administration has been in federal court lying to federal judges about what Elon Musk and his chainsaw gang have been doing in terms of firing federal employees and withholding money and doing all the things that they're taking a sledgehammer to federal offices.
A chainsaw.
A chainsaw. So we have an administration that is actively violating the law. So that's number one. Number two, the laws in the United States have historically been created to allow vicious, awful abuses of power, right? It was the law in some states that a person who is a laborer, a worker, who was enslaved and who tried to get away could be automatically found guilty of being mentally ill. They
Draft-A-Man.
created a mental illness to describe anyone who was enslaved and wanted to get to freedom. And then the law said, if you're mentally ill, we can lock you up. So if the law says we can do all these things because the colonizers, the capitalists, the oligarchs want to be able to do these things, I think, I just have to say, and as a lawyer, I do have a lot of respect for parsing. You have to parse all those statutes, and then you have to look at all the interpretation and what level of court interpreted it what way, so which has more authority, as you go up the levels of court. I have enormous respect for that process. But I think we have to remember that we are once more in this country, it's not new, we are once more in this country faced with an administration that is actively violating the law and using their power to harm people and to shut down any kind of dissent against them. That's the big picture. Now how we
Attorney O'Neill, they're used in 18th century wartime law. That's what I'm saying. These laws are on the books. They're just so old and outdated, and people haven't thought they existed. These individuals that work for the administration have looked these crazy laws up and have been using it. Isn't there another law in Arizona that was from like the 17th century that they used in order to preclude women from doing certain things?
As far as I know, it's still against the law in the state of Arkansas to teach evolution in science classes.
But wait a minute, slavery is still on the ballot in some states.
Isn't that terrible?
As late as I'm just saying this is the country we're in. So for us to act as if I'm trying to get to stopping this so it never happens again. Okay,
well,
I think we have to.
That's the voting down ballot thing that I was talking about.
No,
Congressmen and senators.
But even beyond the vote. See, next year we'll be 250 years old officially. We're still in the country of nations. We're young. And we are very mature. But I think we can turn a corner. We have to decide who we really are. Because what's happening here, pardon my editorializing, but when I start looking back over our history, Dr. King was a communist. So was Rosa Parks. If you were in the NAACP, you were. If you were in the civil rights movement, that's what you were. My parents were. My whole family have FBI files. I get it. And I'm saying, for what? They don't do that to the imperialists, but they do it to the freedom fighters.
Yeah.
And we have to get clear on that. I understand what's on the books. A lot of things are on the books. They're still voting on slavery as late as like 2 election cycles ago.
Yeah, these same laws were used to justify the internment of the Japanese during World War II.
Yes.
Were considered to be a danger to the United States. So again, it's why do we choose to enforce these laws only with certain people?
Well, now there's that.
And I don't think German immigrants were subjected to the mass internment like the Japanese immigrants.
Not to the same extent.
No. We're not going to do that to them. And certainly we put them in front of my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran returning home. They made him move to the colored part of the train when they got to Washington, D.C. He got to New York. He was able to get on, on the whole train. Had the run of the train. But when they got to Washington, D.C. and crossed that Mason-Dixon line, which is just above Washington, he had to move to the back, and Nazi POWs were put in the white car. This is who we are. Yeah. And so when I see this young man being put, he was in Columbia University student housing, like my parents were in student housing at the University of Chicago. And because they have a $5 billion cudgel being held over their head in loans and grants and such, Columbia University cannot and will not protect him.
Well, they've also expelled and revoked the diplomas.
The diplomas. Leslie.
Of the protests, and that's happening at other campuses as well.
You see what happened at the University of Chicago. They upheld the degrees of these students who were peacefully in these encampments. But the persons who violently violated the encampments, we don't even know their names. There's no investigation of them at all. Even though Jerry Seinfeld's wife Mr. Ackman, who helped to get Claudine Gay pushed out of Harvard. In fact, he was behind it.
Mhm.
They paid for these provocateurs to come and violently break up the encampment. Oh, come on, you guys. Look, I only have a couple of minutes left here.
Mhm.
And I need you all to take it because I have got the vapors. What is Barbara Streisand? My favorite person. I love Barbara. I love Babs. She says I'm verklempt, and I am. I am. Look, I love Barbara Streisand, but that's a whole different story. Whole different story. But I am. I don't know what else to say because I think of Breonna Taylor, an American citizen. These people rushed into her apartment and killed her. And
Trayvon Martin. This
Trayvon
guy
Martin.
was killed by some random person on the street.
Yeah, but no, a neighbor. As in love thy. Oh, come on. I mean, no. And I think of the Americans. I've been to Du Bois's grave in Accra, Ghana, and to think one of the finest Americans the country has produced, he was pushed out of the United States as a child of formerly enslaved persons. Are you for real?
But I think also, when you describe the experience of Mahmoud and his wife, we have to remember that this is happening to undocumented people all the time.
Absolutely.
Happening under the Biden administration. This was happening under the Obama administration.
That's why they got to be cautious.
That people have been dragged away from their homes in the dead of night and no one's known where they are. So no, it's not. I mean, I recognize that this is not the only time that this has happened, and it may technically be legal, but it's clear that this is a strategy to silence and to demonize dissent.
And to Black and brown people.
And to Black.
That's why we have citizens. That's why we have Holman Square. Now that's why we had Lieutenant Commander John Burge, who was raping Black boys, with cattle prods.
Oh God. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's as awful as it sounds. So that's why I want to know, where is Mahmoud and how is he doing?
He seems.
Can I just?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Terry.
I have 2 minutes left.
I don't know if you remember the story of the Jena 6. The 6 African American kids who were, I don't know the whole story, but I remember, I remember it. Jena, Louisiana is 77% white in a state that is barely 65% white. So, and it's a very small community. I don't think that Mahmoud's wife would be at all safe, even if she were able to travel to Jena, Louisiana. I don't think it's a mistake that they take a man there where he will be surrounded by white Christian nationalists.
I told you I was an hour away.
Yeah.
And I work for ICE. So
there you go. So, I mean, So once again, our country is doing what we have always done. We have taken people who are vulnerable. We have done everything we can to crush their spirit. We have used our laws to crush other human beings. And Congress has been broken for at least 25 years. So saying, well, Congress has to change it is the same as saying, forget about it, frankly. And so we do have a constitutional right to petition our government for the redress of grievances. That is what protest is all about. Let me just also say, I think the October 7th attacks were an outrageous act of terrorism. And I say this having looked into the Irish troubles, which were, my last name's O'Neill, so I kind of know about that. I don't think that violence is the way to handle any of this. I think that Dr. King's method of nonviolence is the only way we get any kind of change that's worthwhile. So no, October 7th to me was a horror and should be punished in accordance with due process of law. But and I'll stop now.
Yeah, I think I would only say we need to look at whose violence we condemn and whose violence we don't condemn.
And my only last comment would be that it's really incumbent upon the American people to make sure that they look at their own laws, not only locally, state, but federally, in order to make sure that they change and they can't come back to haunt us like it is right now. And I think the most important and interesting thing is, Attorney O'Neill brought up the district judge who asked them to stop deporting the Venezuelan gang people. He was actually appointed initially by George W. Bush, which is a Republican president, and then later appointed to a higher position by Barack Obama. And it's kind of interesting how there's no, what do you call it, solidarity or loyalist movement even within the Republican Party to respect him.
This has nothing to do with party. This is power.
It's power.
And this is protecting imperialism, period.
But it's important for Americans to understand why the judicial system is important.
Well, no,
there's supposed to be a check. There's supposed to be a check in order to make us a balanced
You're absolutely right.
But and it's important that people understand Trump appointed a lot of people.
Absolutely. But that having been said, we have to check ourselves morally. Because, power, people in power do power. They don't do parties. If you don't believe it, think of Mary Madeline and James Carville in the 92 election. They managed the opposing presidential campaigns and they got married right afterwards. It's a perfect metaphor. So get over the parties, everybody. This is about power protecting itself and the people being vulnerable. And that, you're right, we have to look at the laws, but we also have to check ourselves to see what it is that we allow. Because we have a lot of Americans who've been eaten up by the system, and we need to look at that. You guys, I've got to switch over to the next hour, but Leslie Williams, Jewish Voice for Peace, the cranky librarian, I love you, and Attorney Anastasia Sanat, adjunct professor, immigration law, Roosevelt University here in Chicago, and Attorney Terry O'Neill, civil rights lawyer and past president of the National Organization of Women. We've got Medea Benjamin coming up, and guess what, everybody? She's not in prison.
Yeah,
she's going to be on this show.
Not yet.
Thank you for having us.
You know I love you.
Santita. Thanks.
God bless you, everybody. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Love you, sweetie. Let's talk.